I guess I wrote a thing. I've been writing a thing called call it ping theory. Like think of like a ping. I think like my brain, like I need something to evolve. So my brain sends like a sonar ping, and that goes back and touches source, and source then takes that data and then sends a ping back, and then I get something that helps me evolve over natural selection or over a certain period of time, let's say. So it's like, you think of like a coccyx. Somebody said once, if you believe in natural selection, that was a tail, helps us in climbing trees. That over time we realize, as we came down out of trees, if you believe in evolution, I'm not an atheist or theist, but if you do, eventually that tail wouldn't be needed, so we kind of be sending that ping back, that it'd actually be more of a hindrance, let's say, and that eventually, would slowly fade away, and we'd be sending that information back as we became bipedal, walking on 2 feet. So that's kind of how that would work. That larger state of consciousness, that field of consciousness, that creative field of consciousness, impacts us here in this less than stellar place, let's say, this more materialistic plane. But this ties into why I wanted to mention that, as I made some videos on my YouTube about it. Ping theory is what I call it. So like a fish that crawled out of water, and it needed lungs that could breathe air, and so eventually, it evolved better lungs, and it was able to get more oxygen saturation from air rather than from water, and its gills eventually faded away, and then you might see remnants of that, or maybe able to prove something, some genetic line some way. But the point is that if you think of like a soul, like what is a soul? I subscribe to a very Aristotelian, Buddhic sort of thought. Like the Buddhists say that a soul is I saw this thing which made a lot of sense to me, like your good intentions, your character, and your integrity, which is what I think a soul is. And the Aristotelian version is that the part that would go on would be your intelligence stuff that you did in your life. So in that sense, that's why that field of consciousness wouldn't be like, oh no, we don't want to evolve this thing, that source consciousness, let's just say, for lack of a better word. We want it to have a longer tail so it suffers longer or something. It wouldn't be like that. It would slowly give us the information back from the ping. You sent the ping out. I don't need a tail anymore. I'm walking upright. Eventually that hits and bounces back off of source consciousness, and the information is somehow encoded in your consciousness, which impacts your DNA, which then the tail slowly fades away and it becomes the coccyx. You no longer have a huge tail. So that's what I think goes on after death. I'm not trying to get too wooish here, so forgive me. It's just an idea I had. That's what all of this around us seems like is based on conscious experience. What I mean by that is, it's not like somebody says, you ever hear people like, oh, consciousness creates reality, and then they completely misunderstand what that means. They think this plastic lid, if I think it's going to be metal, it's going to poof into metal, and it's only going to impact my flesh, so I can make my hand 10 feet long if I visualize it and make it happen. It's not the case. You still have stuff that's bound within reason. It's not reasonable, for you to harm yourself because you could potentially harm others. Somebody says they want, a better appearance, and that, causes someone, next thing they're going down the road and they're trying to visualize something in their mind's eye, and it causes them to wreck their car. So you have to think that things have to fall within the scope of reason. Is it reasonable to evolve something? And maybe that's why we have, species die off. It wasn't reasonable anymore for those certain species to be around, like, Tasmanian tigers maybe is one of them. Maybe that's why we see certain populations of things get moved around to certain areas, and then, once reintroduced into the wild in other areas, do better. You ever heard the saying, like I said, I'm not an atheist or a theist, but you ever heard the saying where somebody says, God had other plans? Something like that, maybe. That some things do go extinct. I mean, it wouldn't be logical and rational if you wanted a more complex life to just have dinosaurs around. So dinosaurs became birds, and then we had because huge, terrible lizards, so to speak, some of the names, mean terrible lizard. But the point is this, then became birds, which was then, that's more manageable for then other mammals to have this explosion of life in oceans and on land and more diversity. So in that sense, that's kind of a beautiful story for people that believe in creationism as well as people that believe in natural selection. Either way, that's a very interesting story. I don't think it vibes to, it doesn't really, rub shoulders the wrong way with one another. So that's, that's one way to look at a soul. That, this thing I was watching is like, well, if Buddhists don't believe in a soul, then what goes on after death? What gets reborn? There's this thing on PubMed with 1,700 different non-pseudoscientific verifiable events related to people, having these reborn experiences, and people being able to prove it. So that's really fascinating, just the evidence, was well enough to be published, and, with some gusto, let's say, there's some background that was able to be, figured out, that wasn't, pseudoscientific. So with that said, what is being reborn? The Aristotelian soul is your intelligent parts go on, which makes sense, that are why would you want something to go on which wasn't advantageous for the advancement of a species or group or whatever. This is why in certain areas they have lower crime rates, because it's, that we educate properly, and then that education gets spread around, and it helps evolve the mind. So anyway, with that said, that's part of what, my ping theory, what I think maybe in relation to soul, what that implies. I think soul, when you view it outside of that context, can be a bit iffy, because you have stuff like somebody sold their soul. That doesn't read Catholicism. Some people laugh at Catholics. Some people laugh at how that doesn't really work, because if then there's the whole thing of, in the Christian tradition that the Christian God didn't make anything unclean, so how could it make something that would steal somebody's soul and make them suffer? That's a whole other story. Again, I was raised non-denominational Christian. I've been water baptized and born again. My whole family have the non-denominational Christian tradition, which is just following what Christ says. But other than that, I'm not trying to get into that. I just think it's I think when you think about the soul, it's like it would almost imply that there's a lot of baggage and bondage that comes with that idea, and maybe that's why some people have kind of tried to talk about, a soul that's sold, or, soul that's bought, because then it can be like, oh, well, we're protecting you somehow, or we're, I own this thing of you, and then there's this control element that goes in, but rather how the Buddhists kind of view it as you break the fetter, because essentially soul is what? It's a human construct of a word. A soul is related to sea or ocean. You could imagine looking at the sea or the ocean. I see it every day. I work a mile from the ocean. I surf every day. And, you could imagine that it's a very soulful thing. It's very, for lack of a better word, just to look at it. So when you think about that, though, just start attaching things almost this manipulative attachment to something. Imagine if someone's you can't see the ocean every day. You're going to be shutting doors, and they manipulated your connection to soul, essentially. That's a good way to frame it, I think. Good way to look at it. You can't go outside and you're feel like you're outside gives you this life, and that's your soul, essentially. See how that's manipulated then? Something died for your so-called negative attributes. So then you owe this organization your time, your money, or whatever. And I'm not going against that. I've donated to this church in this region, this Grace Oceanside. I do those things because I'm a fan of learning from all paths of life. So sometimes I still go to church, but the point is that it's when it comes down to that concept, I'm still not an atheist or a theist. For me, it's all a learning experience, which is what I think life is, just a learning experience to learn from as many things as you can. So with that said, I think that's what a soul is basically your good intentions, your good actions, what you learn from all the best attributes of an individual's life, fills the seat of the soul, and that's what goes on after death. And sort of your baggage, the worst of you is what's left behind. I don't know if that is some other thing, but it just makes sense. Maybe you could evolve your consciousness to a point, and then you're doing good. And that's why some people, if you ever read ancient stuff from the past, some people are spoken to in some weird way. Yet the Buddha was so like full of light that he almost appeared alien to people. Christ is the same way. People getting threatened by the Pharisees, the very stringent religious types. The Romans with their laws, their rules were threatened by that. Again, I'm not an atheist or theist. I can't stress that enough. I'm not trying to preach, but it's just an idea. I think that that's what the soul is, though. It conceptualizes the good nature that people have within them when they live it out around others. You ever heard the term like soul food, or they're full of soul? I've heard people that were atheists because people said they're full of soul because they're kind, they're loving, they're altruistic, they think of others, they put others first. Those are very soulful things to do. Soul food is slaving away in a kitchen, so to speak, cooking up something good that others share with you, knowing that they're going to enjoy it. You're not wasting, but you're giving your energy, your time, to something that can take 45 minutes to 2 hours, let's say, to help others enjoy sustenance, living life. You're literally giving soul to something. You're giving life to something. Consumption of food. So that's a very fascinating thing I think about. So that's why I think soul exists without, some of the religiosity, the dogmatic, legalistic things that we see associated with it. So anyway, I just want to clarify that. That's my view, how I think ping theory would kind of relate to certain things. It's like we didn't know what to think about death. We had death anxiety. We potentially created stories which related to unconscious or subconscious content. Those things that came from those stories helped us deal with certain things. Eventually somebody figured out that they could harness certain elements of those stories and created this thing called soul, that some places they didn't buy into that. So they just realize as your consciousness keeps evolving that those are concepts or human constructs, and there was something more that went on, and it was only related to goodness. Again, we see the golden rule in practically every religious belief, so it makes more sense that the golden rule is basically all you need to go on. That's treat others as you want to be treated, which is why that is stressed so much in so many religious practices. Harm none. Doing to others as you would have others doing to you. So on and so forth. But and that's how I think that evolved. It's almost like we created something, and then somebody figured out how to control it. And then I don't get any conspiracy stuff. I don't do any of that stuff. So I don't want to be put in that category. I say controlling it, and then we realized, wait a minute, the more we started to learn about the mind, with neuroscience teaching us about prayer and about meditation and fasting, some of these things that we see the ancients used to do, we start realizing that there's a lot more to the story, and that as our consciousness evolves and we're hitting these really high states of consciousness associated with soul without the concept being in our vernacular, our common tongue or language. So you can see the ping theory in action with that. And I would think in potentially 100, 200, 300 years in the future, it's going to be more kind of like the the Buddhist concept or the Aristotelian concept that what goes on after death we're going to view as the good stuff of us. And even if it is just our bones and our flesh rotting in the ground, you still have the impact you made, that the statues that are made, the things we've written and done, the poetry, music, whatever, and that still immortalizes something in essence. And that's kind of creepy when you think about it, because that's still conscious content. So it's like if somebody's reading your content, are they kind of feeding this other part of you in this field of consciousness that has gone on somehow? Anyway, it's just an idea of thought, and that's pretty far out there, but that's where my mind's at right now, so I just want to share that.